Three HOA vehicles rolled to a stop outside Ethan Walker's house just after 8 on a Monday morning. A contractor's truck followed, carrying ladders and removal gear. Karen Whitmore stepped onto the driveway with a violation order and pointed toward the solar panels on Ethan's roof. 14 days, she said. Then the fines start daily. Ethan did not argue. He lifted a folder. Karen's attorney answered a phone, listened, then went pale. The insurer had one question. If solar was unacceptable, why had the HOA certified the neighborhood as energy efficient? Before we go back to how that question reached the insurer, tell me where you are watching from. And subscribe if you enjoy stories where patience, records, and the law matter more than shouting. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan Walker had no reason to think his roof would become the center of a neighborhood fight. He was 46, practical by habit, and the kind of homeowner who fixed a loose hinge before it became a broken door. He lived alone in a 2-story house on Cedar Ridge Drive, a quiet suburban street lined with maples, clipped hedges, and mailboxes painted in matching shades approved by the Homeowners Association. The neighborhood was called Greenfield Estates, although there was nothing especially rural about it. The homes were close enough for neighbors to wave from their driveways, the sidewalks were clean, and the HOA liked to describe the community as carefully planned. Ethan had lived there for 7 years. He paid his dues on time, kept his yard neat, and had never attended an HOA meeting unless a notice specifically concerned his property. He did not hate the association. In fact, he understood why people wanted predictable standards. What he disliked was uncertainty, especially when rules were enforced differently depending on who was asking. That summer, uncertainty arrived in a different form: his electric bill. For 3 years, summer bills had climbed. The house was not enormous, but the air conditioning ran hard during long stretches of heat, and Ethan had recently replaced an older electric water heater. When the July statement arrived, he set it beside the previous year's bill and stared at the difference. It was enough to make a permanent improvement worth studying. He spent 2 evenings comparing solar contractors, utility rates, warranties, roof penetrations, inverter systems, tax paperwork, and projected production. He chose a licensed regional installer called Sun Peak Residential Energy, not because it was the cheapest, but because its proposal included structural review, city permits, utility interconnection, and a clear insurance certificate. The company's engineer inspected the attic and confirmed that the roof could support the system. A municipal permit was issued. The electric utility approved the interconnection plan. The installer prepared a low-profile array of dark panels mounted close to the roof plane, with no batteries outside and no equipment visible from the front porch except a compact disconnect box near the meter. Ethan also submitted the project through the HOA's online architectural portal. He uploaded the site plan, roof diagram, product specifications, photographs, contractor license, and city permit application. When the portal generated a confirmation email, he saved it in a folder labeled Solar HOA. That was normal for Ethan. Years earlier, he had worked as a procurement manager for a commercial building supplier, where a missing date or unsigned change order could turn a small disagreement into a costly mess. He had learned to keep clean records, not because he expected conflict, but because memories changed and documents did not. The installation took 2 days. By late afternoon on the second day, the roof looked almost exactly as the contractor's rendering had promised. The panels were dark, flat, and orderly. From the main entrance to the neighborhood, they were nearly invisible behind the pitch of the roof. From across the street, a person could see only the upper edge of one row. Ethan stood in the driveway while the crew packed its tools. "Looks cleaner than I expected," his neighbor Daniel Price said from the sidewalk. "That was the point," Ethan replied. He went inside believing the difficult part was over. While filing the final inspection paperwork, he noticed an old folder from the day he had purchased the house. Inside was the glossy sales brochure the developer had handed him 7 years earlier. He almost threw it away, then paused at 3 phrases printed across a photograph of tree-lined streets: forward-thinking community, energy-conscious homes, and sustainable suburban living. At the time, those words had sounded like marketing. Ethan slid the brochure back into the folder and forgot about it. 2 days later, a black SUV stopped in front of his house, and nothing afterward felt like marketing. Karen Whitmore stepped out first. She was in her early 50s, sharply dressed despite the heat, with the controlled expression of someone who had already decided how a conversation would end. Behind her came Melissa Grant, chair of the architectural committee, holding a tablet and a printed packet. Karen did not greet Ethan. "These panels violate Greenfield Estates community aesthetic standards," she said, looking up at the roof. "They create reflective surfaces, disrupt the approved roof color, and damage the visual harmony of this street." Ethan glanced from her to the panels. The morning sun was behind the house. Nothing was glaring. Which section prohibits rooftop solar? Karen handed him a notice. At the top, in bold letters, were the words architectural violation. Beneath them, the cited provision required prior approval for exterior modifications visible from common areas and permitted the committee to reject alterations inconsistent with neighborhood design. Ethan read it twice. I don't see the word solar panel. It doesn't need to name every possible modification, Karen said. The board has discretion. Was my application denied? Melissa looked at Karen. Karen answered. You never received approval. That wasn't my question. Karen's jaw tightened. Ethan continued. Was the application denied? We have no record of a completed submission before installation. Ethan reached into his pocket, opened his phone, and searched the folder where he had saved the confirmation email. He turned the screen toward Melissa. The subject line read, Greenfield Estates Architectural Submission Received. The timestamp was 3 weeks old. Below it was a confirmation number. Melissa leaned closer. That might only mean the portal received files. It means you received a submission, Ethan said. Karen folded her arms. Receipt is not approval. I agree. That answer seemed to irritate her more than an argument would have. Ethan opened the email attachment. The portal says applicants should expect a response within 10 business days. I received no request for additional documents, no hearing notice, no denial, and no approval. So I waited until the city permit and utility approvals were complete. Then the contractor installed the system. You assumed silence meant permission. No, I assumed the association would follow its own process. Karen took a step closer. Mr. Walker, this is not a negotiation. You altered the exterior of your home without written HOA authorization. The committee is directing you to remove the system. On what specific standard? I just gave it to you. You gave me a general modification clause. Melissa interrupted, softer than Karen. There are design considerations that aren't always written item by item. Then there should be a record of the committee applying them, Ethan said. Meeting minutes, design guidance, prior decisions, something. Karen's voice became colder. You have 14 calendar days to restore the roof to an approved condition. After that, fines will accrue daily. The association may also recover enforcement costs. How much? The schedule begins at $200 and increases for continuing violations. Ethan looked at the paper again. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten a lawsuit. He did not tell Karen she had picked the wrong homeowner. He folded the notice once and placed it on the workbench inside his open garage. Then he asked, Please send me the complete architectural standards currently in effect, the minutes from the meeting where rooftop solar was determined to be inconsistent with community aesthetics, and the record of what happened to my submission after the portal accepted it. Karen stared at him. You're trying to turn a simple violation into a records dispute. I'm trying to understand the rule you say I violated. The rule is clear. Then the documents should be easy to produce. For the first time, Melissa lowered her tablet without typing. Karen pointed toward the roof again. 14 days. Then she turned and walked back to the SUV. Ethan watched the vehicle disappear around the corner before looking at the notice once more. The paper had a rule number. It had a deadline. It had a signature. What it did not have was a single sentence saying solar panels were prohibited. That was the first thing Ethan could verify. It would not be the last. That evening, Ethan logged into the Greenfield Estates homeowner portal and downloaded every governing document available. The covenants ran more than 60 pages. The architectural guidelines added another 30. There were specific rules for fences, paint colors, sheds, satellite dishes, roof materials, exterior lighting, driveway coatings, basketball hoops, landscaping borders, and even the acceptable height of decorative flagpoles. Ethan searched for solar. Nothing. He searched for photovoltaic. Nothing. He searched for energy system, renewable, and panel. Still nothing that prohibited rooftop solar. The only language Karen appeared to be relying on was the broad clause she had cited at his house. Exterior modifications visible from common areas required approval and had to remain consistent with the neighborhood's appearance. That could matter. Ethan understood that. But a general clause was not the same as a written solar ban, and it did not explain what the architectural committee had done with his application for 10 business days. He created a folder on his laptop and saved the current versions of every HOA document. Then he opened the paper file from when he bought the house. The old sales brochure was still there. This time he read it carefully. Across one page was a photograph of a model home beside a row of young trees. Under the image, Greenfield Estates was described as an energy-efficient residential development designed for modern suburban living. Another section promoted energy-conscious homes and forward-thinking community standards. A third referred to sustainable suburban living, without defining exactly what that meant. Ethan did not treat the brochure as a legal victory. Marketing language was marketing language. But it did create a question. If energy efficiency had been important enough to sell houses, why was a permitted energy improvement suddenly described as a threat to the character of the neighborhood? He saved an archived HOA webpage that praised smart thermostats, upgraded insulation, efficient clubhouse lighting, and reduced community energy use. None of it guaranteed solar approval, but it reinforced the same message. Energy efficiency had been treated as an advantage. Ethan drafted a short email to Karen. He did not accuse her of hypocrisy. He did not attach 10 pages of argument. He wrote only, "Please confirm whether Greenfield Estates currently represents itself as an energy-efficient or energy-conscious community in any HOA, insurance, sales, or marketing materials. I am asking because the violation notice I received appears inconsistent with prior materials describing energy improvements as a community value." He copied the Architectural Committee's general address and sent it at 8:42 p.m. The next morning, Karen replied. She did not answer the question. "Your deadline remains in effect," she wrote. "Prior promotional language does not supersede architectural requirements. Continued refusal to remove an unapproved exterior modification may result in additional enforcement action." Ethan read the email twice. Then he sent one more message. "I understand that promotional language does not supersede the covenants. Please identify the current written standard that makes rooftop solar unacceptable and provide the requested committee record." No response came that day, or the next. On the third morning, the portal displayed a new notice reminding him that 9 days remained before continuing fines could begin. Ethan printed it. He also printed Karen's email. Then he saved PDF copies of the archived website pages and the brochure scans. The dispute was beginning to change shape. At first, Ethan had assumed the HOA had misplaced his application and was using a broad rule to pressure him into compliance. That would have been frustrating but ordinary. Now something else bothered him. Karen was willing to state repeatedly that his solar array conflicted with community standards. Yet when he asked whether the HOA still described Greenfield Estates as energy efficient, she avoided a direct answer. So he did what he had learned to do years earlier. He stopped guessing. He started building a timeline. On the left side of a yellow legal pad, he wrote dates. On the right, he listed documents: application submitted, portal confirmation, permit issued, utility approval, installation completed, violation delivered, records requested, Karen's response, archive marketing saved. Then he circled one phrase from the old brochure: energy-efficient residential development. It was not proof, but it was the first thread that did not belong in Karen's version of the story. The next useful clue came from someone Ethan had not thought to call. His neighbor across the cul-de-sac, Daniel Price, stopped by on Saturday morning while Ethan was washing dust from the driveway. Daniel had lived in Greenfield Estates since the development opened, and for 2 years he had served as treasurer on an earlier HOA board. Ethan showed him the old brochure. "Do you remember why they used this phrase so much?" he asked, tapping energy-efficient residential development. Daniel smiled. "Because everybody used it. The developer loved it. Just marketing? Mostly, but not entirely." Daniel leaned against the garage frame and thought for a moment. "About 5 years ago, the board did a big insurance review. Common property, clubhouse, pool, storm exposure, liability. We were trying to get premiums under control. The carrier asked for a risk questionnaire. Energy upgrades were part of the package, I think." Ethan stopped spraying the driveway. "What kind of upgrades?" "I don't remember every detail. LED lighting, thermostats, insulation, maybe equipment replacements. There was a classification or discount tied to the property profile." "Was solar mentioned?" Daniel shook his head. "Couldn't tell you." That answer was enough to send Ethan back to the records. Every year, the HOA distributed an annual financial package before the budget meeting. Ethan downloaded 5 years of reports and lined them up by date. Insurance costs moved up and down, but 1 year stood out. The notes showed a reduction after what the treasurer had called a community risk profile review. He opened the meeting minutes from the same period. Buried beneath landscaping bids and clubhouse maintenance was one sentence: "Energy efficiency classification accepted by carrier. Revised property package approved." Ethan read it 3 times. Then he checked the attachment list. Exhibit C, Carrier Risk Profile Questionnaire. The exhibit itself was missing from the portal. On Monday morning, Ethan submitted a formal records request to the HOA manager. He cited the meeting date, the exhibit number, and the description exactly as written. Karen replied instead, "The requested material is unrelated to your architectural violation." Ethan answered, "I am requesting an association record referenced in published board minutes." Please provide it or identify the basis for withholding it. 2 days later, the manager sent 14 pages. None was Exhibit C. There were invoices, renewal summaries, a coverage declaration, and a 1-page premium comparison. Ethan checked the page numbering. The renewal summary referred to response provided in attached community profile questionnaire. No attachment. He sent another email. Thank you. The production appears incomplete. Please provide the questionnaire referenced in the renewal summary and identified as Exhibit C in the board minutes. Karen answered within 20 minutes. Mr. Walker, repeated demands for irrelevant historical records are becoming disruptive. Stop harassing the board and address the violation on your property. Then, late the following afternoon, the HOA manager uploaded a PDF to the records portal. Exhibit C. The document was 4 years old. It contained questions about common facilities, maintenance schedules, construction materials, safety systems, energy consumption, and community improvement programs. Several answers had been typed directly into the form. Greenfield Estates described itself as having adopted energy-conscious property management standards. Another answer referred to ongoing efficiency improvements across common and residential-facing community programs. A third listed upgrades used to support the association's risk and operating profile. Ethan searched every page for solar. Nothing definitive appeared, but the last page said, See Attachment 3, Energy Improvement Summary. Attachment 3 was not included. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Every time he reached the end of one document, the record pointed to another document that was missing. That did not prove anyone had done anything wrong, but it did prove Karen's claim that the insurance records were irrelevant was becoming harder to accept. He sent one final request for Attachment 3. This time, Karen did not respond. The next morning, however, Ethan received a new continuing violation warning and a reminder that the first fine would soon be posted to his account. He looked at the warning, then at the insurance questionnaire. Karen was moving faster on penalties. Ethan decided he would move slower on assumptions. He wanted the attachment, he wanted the dates, and he wanted to know why a supposedly irrelevant insurance file had become the one subject Karen seemed most eager to close. Attachment 3 arrived from a different source. 3 days after Ethan's request, an email appeared in his personal inbox from Laura Chen, a current HOA board member. The message contained only one sentence. I think you should have the complete record before the next meeting. Attached was a 12-page PDF. Ethan opened it and immediately recognized the missing title, Energy Improvement Summary. The document had been prepared during the insurance review and submitted with the HOA's community profile. It listed efficiency projects at the clubhouse, pool equipment upgrades, lighting replacements, smart controls, and educational materials distributed to homeowners. One paragraph mattered more than the others. It described Greenfield Estates as a community whose standards support practical, code-compliant residential improvements that reduce long-term energy consumption while preserving neighborhood appearance. Ethan read the sentence again. It did not say solar systems were automatically allowed. It did not promise residents unrestricted rights to alter their homes. But it was unmistakably different from Karen's position that his permitted rooftop array was inherently incompatible with community character. Ethan opened the violation notice beside the attachment. On one screen, the HOA told its insurer that community standards supported practical, code-compliant energy improvements. On the other, the HOA told Ethan that his code-compliant energy system damaged visual harmony and had to be removed. He called Laura. Why did you send this? There was a pause, because I asked Karen why it wasn't included in the records response. And? She said it was outdated and not relevant. Do you agree? No. Laura explained that she had joined the board only 9 months earlier. She had never seen the insurance package until Ethan began asking questions. When she searched the board's shared archive, she found not only Attachment 3 but emails showing the summary had been reused during later renewal discussions. How much did it save the HOA? Ethan asked. I don't know yet, Laura said. But the classification mattered. The board discussed it more than once. Ethan did not ask her to take sides. He asked only that she preserve whatever records she had access to. Then he began building a second timeline. 4 years earlier, insurance risk review. 3 weeks later, revised premium package. Over the next 2 years, marketing continued using energy-conscious language. 18 months earlier, Karen became HOA president. 9 months earlier, Laura joined the board. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan submitted his solar application. 10 business days passed without a decision. 2 days after installation, violation issued. The dates did not prove a conspiracy. They did something more useful. They narrowed the questions. Ethan returned to the annual budgets and calculated the insurance difference before and after the revised property package. The reduction was not dramatic enough to sound like a television scandal. It was several $1,000s in the first year, followed by more favorable adjustments later. But over time it mattered. More important, Greenfield Estates had continued using the same energy-conscious identity in sales materials supplied to real estate agents and prospective buyers. Ethan found a recent welcome packet online. It called the neighborhood "A Modern Community Committed to Efficient Living and Thoughtful Design." He added it to the folder. Then he wrote 3 headings on a whiteboard in his home office. Insurer, homeowners, Ethan. Under Insurer, he wrote supports code-compliant energy improvements. Under homeowners, he wrote modern community committed to efficient living. Under Ethan, he wrote remove solar panels for violating community character. He stepped back. That was the contradiction. Not that an energy-efficient HOA could never regulate solar. It could have design standards. It could require applications. It could set reasonable placement rules if authorized by its documents and applicable law. The problem was that Karen was describing the association's position differently, depending on the audience. Ethan emailed his requested timeline and documents to himself for backup. An hour later, Laura sent one more message. Karen knows I accessed the archive. She is calling a special board session. That changed the temperature of the dispute. Until then, Ethan had been gathering records while Karen gathered penalties. Now the board was reacting to the records themselves, and that meant the next meeting would not really be about panels on a roof. It would be about which version of Greenfield Estates the board was prepared to defend in writing. For Ethan, that distinction mattered more than any angry exchange Karen could stage in public. Karen did not wait for the special meeting to increase the pressure. On Monday, Ethan received a second violation notice. The first fine had been posted to his account, and the letter warned that additional amounts could accrue if the panels remained in place. It also stated that the HOA might seek reimbursement for legal and enforcement expenses. The explanation had changed. The first notice focused on visual harmony. The second said Ethan had installed the system before obtaining written board approval. Ethan placed the 2 notices side by side. Different emphasis. Same demand, remove the panels. He answered with a 1-page timeline and attached supporting records. Architectural submission, received by portal. Confirmation number, generated automatically. No request for more information, no denial, no hearing. Municipal permit issued. Structural review completed. Utility interconnection, approved. Installation, completed after the HOA's stated response window had passed. Ethan did not write that silence automatically created approval. He knew that depended on the governing documents and applicable law. Instead, he asked the board to identify exactly what happened to his application after submission and what authority allowed it to treat the file as though it had never existed. Karen replied that the issue was closed. Ethan decided it was time to have someone else read the record. He hired Michael Reyes, a property attorney whose practice included HOA disputes and residential governance. Michael was not impressed by dramatic claims. During their first meeting, he spread the documents across a conference table and asked Ethan to tell the story without adjectives. No corrupt, no illegal, no outrageous, Michael said. Just dates, documents, and what each person did. Ethan did. Michael took notes. When Ethan finished, the attorney separated the dispute into 3 questions. First, does the association actually have authority under its current documents to force removal of this system? He tapped the architectural guidelines. Second, did they follow their own review process with your application? He tapped the portal confirmation. Third, and this may become more important than either of those, what representations has this association made to third parties about energy improvements and community standards? He tapped the insurer documents. Ethan asked, does that mean they committed fraud? Michael shook his head immediately. It means we do not use that word unless the evidence earns it. Right now, we have inconsistency. We verify first. That was exactly the approach Ethan wanted. Michael sent the HOA a preservation letter. It requested that the association retain emails, board minutes, insurance correspondence, architectural submissions, portal logs, and draft policy documents related to solar installations and energy efficiency representations. The letter did not threaten criminal charges. It did not demand Karen resign. It simply put the board on notice that relevant records should not disappear. The response was immediate. Within 3 hours, Greenfield Estates announced an emergency executive session. That evening, Laura called Ethan. I can't discuss privileged board advice, she said, but I can tell you Karen is furious. About the panels, about the preservation letter. Ethan looked at the stack of documents on his desk. That seems like the wrong thing to be furious about. Laura gave a tired laugh. You didn't hear that from me. The next morning, Karen sent a community-wide message. It did not name Ethan, but everyone on Cedar Ridge knew who it described. The email warned that unapproved exterior energy equipment could affect neighborhood aesthetics and property values. It reminded homeowners that municipal permits did not replace HOA approval. That suited Ethan. 2 days later, the HOA scheduled Ethan's formal violation hearing. Karen would chair it. The architectural committee would present its findings. The board would vote on whether the removal order and fines remained in effect. For the first time, Ethan would be allowed to put his documents into the official meeting record. He prepared a binder with numbered tabs. Tab 1, Governing Documents. Tab 2, Application Confirmation. Tab Permits and Inspection. Tab 4, Violation Notices. Tab 5, Historical Marketing. Tab 6, Insurance Questionnaire. Tab 7, Attachment 3. At the front, he placed a single sheet containing 3 questions. Michael read them and nodded. No speeches? No speeches. Good. Karen wanted the hearing to be about whether Ethan had obeyed her order. Ethan intended to make it about whether the board could prove the order had a defensible foundation. That was a much narrower fight, and a far more dangerous one for someone relying on certainty instead of records. The hearing room at the Greenfield Estates clubhouse held 30 folding chairs, a board table and projector screen that Karen had already filled with photographs of Ethan's roof. Karen opened the meeting by describing the case as a straightforward architectural violation. Mr. Walker installed a highly visible exterior system without final written approval, she said. The committee determined that the installation is inconsistent with established neighborhood aesthetics. Melissa Grant presented the photographs. 2 board members nodded politely. Laura did not. When Ethan's turn came, he placed his binder on the table and stood without approaching the projector. I have 5 questions, he said. Karen looked impatient. You may make a statement. I'd rather ask the questions. Michael Reyes sat beside him silently. Ethan began. What written provision directly prohibits rooftop solar? Karen pointed to the General Exterior Modification Clause. So there is no provision that directly names rooftop solar. The clause gives the committee design authority. Ethan nodded. Second question. On what date did the board or architectural committee adopt the position that a solar system like mine is inconsistent with community standards? Melissa looked through her notes. Karen answered. The standards have always required aesthetic compatibility. That wasn't the question. Was there a specific decision or guidance document? No separate solar rule was required. Ethan moved on. Third, who reviewed my architectural submission? Silence. Melissa tapped her tablet. We have not been able to determine who was assigned the file. Was it denied? No formal denial appears in the portal. Was additional information requested? No. Was a hearing scheduled before installation? No. Karen interrupted. None of that changes the requirement for written approval. Ethan did not argue. Fourth question. Where are the minutes showing that this board adopted the solar position you are enforcing today? Karen's expression hardened. We do not create a separate vote for every interpretation of existing standards. Ethan turned 1 page. Fifth. Why does the association continue to describe Greenfield Estates as energy efficient in materials used with homeowners, buyers, and third parties? Karen leaned back. Marketing language has nothing to do with covenants. I agree that marketing does not replace the covenants. Karen looked relieved. Then Ethan opened tab 6. But this is not a sales brochure. He placed the insurer's community risk profile questionnaire on the document camera. The room became quiet. Karen's attorney, seated at the far end of the board table, leaned forward. Ethan turned to the page describing energy-conscious property management. Then he opened attachment 3 and displayed the paragraph stating that community standards supported practical code-compliant residential improvements that reduced long-term energy consumption while preserving appearance. Laura looked directly at Karen. Melissa stopped scrolling. Karen said, "That document is years old." Ethan answered, "Has the association notified the insurer that its policy toward energy improvements changed?" Karen did not answer. The attorney spoke for the first time. I think the board should take a short recess. Karen looked toward him. Why? Because I want to review the insurance materials and the preservation letter before further discussion. For the first time since the dispute began, Karen was not directing the room. The board recessed for 20 minutes. Neighbors whispered in the chairs behind Ethan. Michael remained silent until they stepped into the hallway. That went well, Ethan said. Michael shook his head. It went accurately. Don't confuse that with finished. He was right. When the board returned, Karen's attorney gave a careful statement. He said the insurer documents did not automatically control architectural enforcement and that the board retained authority to interpret existing covenants. Then Karen called for a vote. 3 members voted to uphold the violation. 2 voted against it. Laura was one of the 2. The removal order remained. The fines remained. Karen closed the hearing with a small, controlled smile. Ethan gathered his binder. Outside the clubhouse, Laura caught up with him. "I'm sorry. Don't be. You showed them the contradiction." "Yes, and they ignored it." "Not exactly." Laura frowned. Ethan looked back through the glass doors at the board table. "They put it on the record." That mattered. Because before the hearing, Karen could still describe the problem privately as a simple disagreement with one homeowner. Now the official minutes would show that the board had seen the insurance language, had been asked whether its policy changed, and had chosen to continue enforcement without answering. The hearing had not ended the case. It had made the next question harder to avoid for long. The first homeowner contacted Ethan the morning after the hearing. Her name was Rachel Morgan, and she lived 4 streets away in a ranch-style house with a south-facing roof almost perfect for solar. "I watched the meeting," she said. "You need to see what they did to my application." 2 years earlier, Rachel had requested approval for an 18-panel array. The architectural committee asked for revised drawings. She provided them. Then it asked for a roof color simulation. She provided that too. After 3 months of delays, the installer's quoted price expired, and Rachel abandoned the project. Did they deny it? No. That was the problem. They just never finished reviewing it. She forwarded Ethan the email chain. Later that afternoon, another resident, Thomas Bell, sent something more surprising. His solar system had been approved. The panels were dark, low profile, and visible from the street in almost the same way Ethan's were. The approval letter was dated 3 years earlier. Ethan put Rachel's incomplete file beside Thomas's approval and his own violation. 3 homeowners, 3 different outcomes, no clear solar policy. Michael Reyes cautioned him not to overstate what the files showed. "Inconsistent treatment is relevant," he said, "but we need enough records to know whether the projects were truly comparable." So Ethan asked homeowners to share documents voluntarily. He did not post accusations online. He did not organize a protest at Karen's house. He created a spreadsheet with 4 categories: approved, delayed, denied, and incomplete record. Within a week, 11 homeowners had provided information. 2 systems had been approved. 3 applications had stalled without final decisions. 1 had been rejected based on roof visibility. Several residents had only preliminary emails and never completed the process. The pattern was messy rather than dramatic, which made it more useful. There was no sign that Greenfield Estates had consistently enforced a long-standing rule against rooftop solar. Daniel Price, the former treasurer, introduced Ethan to another former board member named Robert Mills. Robert remembered Karen arguing about solar before she became president. "She hated how panels looked," he said. "Used to call them commercial equipment on residential roofs. Was there ever a vote to ban them? Not while I was there." Why didn't the board create a policy? Because the developers' salespeople liked the energy-efficient branding. They wanted flexibility. Some buyers asked about green upgrades. That conversation connected the 2 stories Ethan had been seeing in the records. The marketing side wanted Greenfield Estates to look modern and energy-conscious. Karen wanted it to look traditionally upscale. Neither preference alone proved wrongdoing. The problem came when one preference was presented to insurers and buyers, while the other was enforced against homeowners without a clearly adopted standard. Michael requested additional association records relating to prior solar applications. This time, the HOA's attorney answered instead of Karen. He agreed to provide redacted decisions, but warned that the association disputed Ethan's characterization of its policies. He wanted the documents, not the characterization. While reviewing annual budgets again, he also calculated the financial effect of the insurance reclassification. The numbers were not cinematic. The HOA had not secretly saved millions of dollars. In the first year, the premium difference appeared to be several $1,000s. Later renewals reflected multiple variables, including property values and coverage changes. Still, the energy efficiency profile had been part of the underwriting discussion. That was enough to raise a larger concern. If the insurer believed Greenfield Estates maintained certain standards when it evaluated the association's risk profile, what would happen if the HOA now took an official position inconsistent with those representations? The answer could affect more than Ethan. A carrier could review the account. It could ask for updated information. It could revise classifications, terms, or pricing. No one knew yet whether any change would occur. That uncertainty spread through the neighborhood once residents learned about the issue. Karen responded by calling the dispute misinformation generated by a disgruntled homeowner. Ethan refused to answer publicly. Instead, Michael prepared a neutral verification request. Just attach documents and a question to the insurance carrier. Did the association's current position toward residential energy improvements remain consistent with the representations used in the Greenfield Estates underwriting file? The question moved the dispute outside Karen's control. Until that moment, every decision had passed through the HOA. Now, someone with no interest in neighborhood politics would read the same documents, and unlike the board, the insurer would not care who had the louder voice. It would care which version of Greenfield Estates was true. Michael sent the verification request on a Tuesday morning. The letter was deliberately plain. It identified Ethan as a Greenfield Estates homeowner, explained that an architectural dispute had raised questions about historical association representations, and attached only documents that could be authenticated from HOA records. The carrier, Heritage Mutual Property Group, acknowledged receipt 2 days later. For 3 weeks, she had answered Ethan's questions with deadlines and enforcement notices. Now the HOA attorney, Charles Dwyer, became the contact. He requested a copy of Michael's letter, even though the carrier had already sent the association a notice of inquiry. Heritage Mutual wanted 4 things: the community classification currently being used, the architectural standards currently in effect, the date of any material change in policies relating to residential energy improvements, and confirmation that prior representations in the underwriting file remained accurate. Michael read the request aloud to Ethan. "They are not deciding your solar dispute," he said. "I know. They are deciding whether their file describes the association accurately. That is the point." A week later, the HOA received a more specific follow-up. The underwriter had compared Attachment 3 with the recent violation materials. The question was simple. If Greenfield Estates now considered rooftop solar systems, like Ethan's, incompatible with community standards, how should Heritage Mutual understand the association's earlier statement that those standards supported practical, code-compliant residential improvements designed to reduce long-term energy use while preserving neighborhood appearance? Michael forwarded the question to Ethan. For several seconds, he just looked at it. There was no accusation in the sentence, no dramatic language, no demand that Karen apologize, but it forced the board to choose between 2 explanations. If the HOA said its policy had changed, Heritage Mutual wanted the effective date, meeting minutes, approval authority, and evidence that the carrier had been informed. If the HOA said the policy had not changed, then the board would have to explain why Ethan's system was being removed under standards previously described as supportive of code-compliant energy improvements. Karen tried a third path. In a draft response circulated to the board, she argued that energy efficiency referred only to common area operations and approved residential features, not rooftop solar. Laura objected. Attachment 3 used broader language. So did several old homeowner communications. Charles Dwyer advised the board not to make categorical statements until he completed a document review. Karen pressed him. "Are you saying we cannot enforce our own covenants?" "I'm saying the carrier asked a factual question," he replied. "We should answer the factual question." The exchange appeared in Laura's notes, which she later preserved with the board record. Ethan knew none of this in real time. He only saw the effects. His next scheduled fine did not post. Then the HOA portal changed his account status from continuing violation to pending review. Karen did not withdraw the removal demand, but she stopped sending countdown emails. For the first time, the pressure moved in the opposite direction. Heritage Mutual requested documentation supporting the effective date of the solar interpretation. Charles asked the architectural committee for minutes. Melissa could not find any vote creating a solar-specific standard. He asked the management company for portal records. Those showed Ethan's application had indeed been submitted and had remained unassigned for most of the review period. He asked for prior solar decisions. The records showed approvals, delays, and inconsistent reasoning. The more the attorney tried to prepare one clean answer, the more the files resisted him. Karen called the insurer's question unfair. "It is actually very fair," he told Ethan. "They are not asking whether solar is beautiful. They are asking whether the association's statements match its practices." That distinction became the center of the case. Karen had spent weeks arguing aesthetics. The insurer cared about consistency. Karen had treated the dispute as a matter of authority. The insurer treated it as a matter of representations, and Ethan had not created the contradiction. He had only put the HOA's own documents next to one another. 3 days before the board's response was due, Heritage Mutual scheduled a conference call. Board members, management, counsel, and underwriting would attend. Ethan was not invited. Michael was not invited. This was an insurance account review between the carrier and the association. Karen seemed relieved. She told one board member that without Ethan in the room, the discussion could get back to facts. Laura later repeated the remark to Michael. He smiled when he heard it. That is exactly what should happen. Because the facts were no longer sitting in Ethan's binder. They were sitting in the insurer's file. The conference call never became the final showdown Karen expected, because 24 hours before it began, she tried to change the ground beneath the dispute. Every Greenfield Estates homeowner received an email titled Architectural Standards Clarification. Attached was a 4-page document. The new language addressed solar directly. Rooftop systems had to be positioned so they were not visible from public streets where reasonably possible. Panels could not extend above the roofline. Equipment had to match surrounding materials, and no installation could proceed without prior written board approval. Karen's email said the document did not create new restrictions. It merely clarified standards that have always applied. Ethan opened the attachment and checked the footer. Revision date, that week. He logged into the HOA portal. The architectural guidelines file had been replaced. The new version contained the solar section. The copy Ethan had downloaded before the dispute did not. He called Michael. Do not accuse them of backdating anything, Michael said. First, preserve both files. Ethan did. Then they checked the portal's version history. The solar language had been uploaded after Karen issued Ethan's first violation. That alone did not prove the board had acted improperly. Associations sometimes revised written guidance during disputes. The real question was whether the language had been validly adopted earlier, as Karen claimed. Michael asked Charles Dwyer for the meeting minutes, vote, resolution, or policy memorandum, showing when the clarified solar standard originally became effective. Charles responded that he was reviewing the issue. A homeowner named Rachel Morgan supplied another piece. Months earlier, when she had downloaded the guidelines for her own renovation, she saved the file to her computer. Her copy matched Ethan's older version. No solar section. Thomas Bell produced the guidelines from the year his solar system was approved. Again, no solar section. Michael placed all 3 versions into the preservation file. Old version, prior homeowner version, new clarification. Then Charles searched the board archive. No resolution appeared. No recorded vote. No dated policy adopting the new wording. Melissa Grant, the architectural chair, remembered informal conversations about roof visibility, but could not identify any meeting where the exact rules had been approved. Karen insisted that the section merely expressed the board's existing interpretation. That argument might have remained defensible if she had stopped there. She did not. During an internal email exchange, she wrote to Laura and 2 other directors. We need to tighten the solar language now so Walker cannot exploit gaps in the old wording. Laura preserved the message. Then Karen sent another. Once the clarification is posted, our position will be much cleaner. Laura forwarded both to Charles Dwyer and told him she would not sign any statement saying the language had always existed. That forced the HOA attorney into a difficult position. He informed the board that the insurer had asked for the effective date of any policy change. If the association supplied the newly posted document as though it had governed Ethan's installation, the carrier could compare the date with portal records and meeting minutes. Karen called the distinction technical. Charles called it material. Ethan still did not know the contents of the internal emails, but he noticed another change. The HOA canceled the contractor consultation that had been scheduled to estimate removal costs for his panels. His account remained on hold. Then Michael received a letter from Charles. The board was temporarily suspending additional enforcement activity pending document review. Not rescinding, not apologizing, suspending. It looked like Ethan was close to winning. Michael warned him again. Do not treat a pause as a resolution. He was right. Karen began calling board members individually. She argued that backing down would encourage homeowners to ignore architectural review. She warned that Ethan was using insurance paperwork to strip the HOA of authority. She proposed that the board reaffirm its interpretation at an emergency meeting before responding to Heritage Mutual. Laura objected that doing so after the dispute began would not establish what the policy had been when Ethan applied. The board split. 2 directors wanted the violation withdrawn. 2 wanted Karen's interpretation upheld. 1 remained undecided. Then Charles received Laura's preserved emails. He called Karen privately. No one outside that conversation knew exactly what he said. But less than an hour later, Heritage Mutual amended the agenda for the conference call. 1 new item appeared. Confirmation of effective date and authorization history for residential solar standards. Karen had tried to make the rule clearer. Instead, she had given the insurer a second question. And this one came with timestamps. For Ethan, the fight had moved beyond aesthetics and into something Karen could not rewrite with confidence anymore. Karen sat at the center of the board table with Charles Dwyer to her right. Laura Chen across from her, Melissa Grant near the end, and two other directors beside the speakerphone. The HOA manager had printed the underwriting file and placed a copy in front of every person. Heritage Mutual joined by video. Dana began calmly. We are not here to determine a homeowner dispute. We are here to confirm that the association information in our file remains accurate. Karen nodded. Of course. The dispute has been mischaracterized. Charles looked at her, then at Dana. Dana continued. Our file includes an energy improvement summary stating that Greenfield Estates standards support practical, code-compliant residential improvements that reduce long-term energy consumption while preserving neighborhood appearance. She held up the page. We also received a recent violation notice requiring removal of a permitted rooftop solar system, based in part on incompatibility with community aesthetics. Karen leaned toward the microphone. Solar equipment is different from general efficiency measures. That may be, Dana said. So I need a precise answer. The room became still. Is Greenfield Estates taking the position that a code-compliant residential solar system of the type described in the Walker file is, by its nature, incompatible with current community standards? Karen opened her mouth. Charles raised one hand slightly. Dana waited. Karen tried to narrow the issue. The problem is not energy efficiency. The problem is architectural control. Dana nodded. Then what written standard, effective on the date of Mr. Walker's application, made his specific system unacceptable? Melissa looked down at her copy. Karen said, the board has always had discretion over visible exterior alterations. I understand. I am asking about the solar-specific interpretations supplied to us this week. Dana displayed the newly posted clarification. What is its effective date? Karen answered. It reflects standards that already existed. Where is the adoption record? Silence. Charles spoke. We have not located a board vote adopting that exact language before the Walker dispute. Laura added, because there wasn't one. Karen turned toward her. Laura did not look away. Dana moved to the next document. We also have historical approval records for other residential solar installations. Thomas Bell's approval letter appeared on the screen. Was this system approved under the same general architectural clause? Melissa answered quietly. Yes. And the Walker system? Similar clause. What material distinction led to removal in one case and approval in the other? Melissa hesitated. I would need to review the design files, Karen interrupted. Every property is different. Dana said, that is reasonable. Please provide the documented distinction used in the decision. No one answered. Then Charles opened his folder. Before we continue, I need to advise the board that I have reviewed internal correspondence concerning the new clarification. Karen's face changed. Charles did not read the emails aloud. He did not need to. He said only that the timing and language made it inadvisable to represent the solar section as a pre-existing written standard. One of the undecided directors, Mark Ellis, leaned back in his chair. So why are we still enforcing the removal order? Karen turned to him. Because if we let Walker bypass approval, we lose control of the architectural process. Mark shook his head. He submitted an application. We lost track of it. Karen looked toward Melissa. Melissa spoke carefully. The portal record shows the file was received and not assigned during most of the review window. Mark made a motion. Reassign the Walker violation. Remove all associated fines. Suspend enforcement of the new solar clarification until council completes an independent review of the architectural process. Laura seconded it. Karen objected. This is an overreaction to an insurance inquiry. Mark looked at the speakerphone. No, this is a reaction to our own files. The vote was 4-1. Karen was the only no. Dana Brooks made a note. Heritage Mutual would continue its account review and request updated community information, but no one threatened immediate cancellation. No dramatic punishment fell on innocent homeowners. The carrier simply wanted the record corrected. After the call ended, Charles sent Michael a 2-sentence email. The board has rescinded the violation against Mr. Walker and removed all related fines. Further architectural policy review is pending. Michael called Ethan. It's over? The removal order is over, Michael said. The review is just beginning. Ethan stepped outside and looked at the roof. The panels had never moved. Karen had spent weeks ordering him to remove them. In the end, the decisive question did not come from Ethan. It came from the one organization that had no reason to care who controlled the HOA meeting. All it wanted was consistency, and Karen could not provide it. The victory would have felt incomplete if the story had ended with one email. Over the next 3 months, Greenfield Estates had to untangle what the dispute exposed. Ethan's account was cleared first. Every solar-related fine disappeared from the ledger. The association reimbursed part of his legal expenses under a settlement negotiated by Michael and Charles. The agreement did not declare Karen personally liable, and Ethan did not demand a public apology. He wanted the record corrected. That happened. The board hired an outside governance consultant to review the architectural process. The consultant found what Ethan's file had already suggested. Applications were being handled inconsistently, deadlines were not tracked reliably, committee interpretations were sometimes communicated without formal written guidance, and homeowners could not easily determine the status of pending requests. The board adopted a new process. Every architectural submission received a tracking number visible to the homeowner. Requests for additional information had to be issued within a defined period. Decisions had to identify the written standard being applied. New policies could not be treated as retroactive rules. Meeting minutes relating to architectural standards were posted in a searchable archive. The solar clarification Karen had uploaded during the dispute was withdrawn. Months later, after public review and legal analysis, the board adopted a revised solar policy. It addressed panel placement, wiring, roofline, equipment screening, and application procedures. It did not guarantee approval of every project, but it gave homeowners something they had not had before, a rule they could actually read. Heritage Mutual completed its review without canceling the community's coverage. The carrier requested updated descriptions of Greenfield Estates programs and removed language that no longer matched current practices. Some underwriting terms were adjusted during renewal, but the neighborhood did not collapse under an impossible premium increase. Residents were not punished for Karen's decisions. The correction was administrative, not apocalyptic. That mattered to Ethan. He had never wanted to prove that every person on the HOA board was corrupt. Laura had helped preserve records. Melissa had eventually acknowledged the portal failure. Mark had changed his vote when the evidence became clear. Even Charles, the HOA attorney, had refused to defend a claim the files could not support. The problem had never been that everyone inside the system was dishonest. The problem was that too many people had allowed one person's certainty to substitute for a documented process. Karen's position weakened quickly after the insurance review. At the next open board meeting, residents asked why a rule had been posted during an active dispute and described as something that had always existed. They asked why prior solar applications had received different outcomes. They asked why homeowners had needed an attorney to obtain documents referenced in official minutes. Karen defended her decisions. She said she had been protecting property values and neighborhood standards. Some residents agreed that architectural control mattered, but even several of those homeowners said control had to be predictable. Within 6 weeks, Karen resigned as president. Although she remained a homeowner in Greenfield Estates, she said the board had become unwilling to enforce standards firmly. Laura was elected interim president. Her first community email did not mention Ethan. It announced a records access schedule, a review of architectural procedures, and a public workshop on the new solar guidelines. Rachel Morgan attended that workshop. So did Thomas Bell. Rachel submitted a new solar application 2 weeks later. This time, the portal showed its status from the moment it was received. The committee asked one question about conduit placement. Rachel's contractor answered. The board approved the project. On a warm afternoon near the end of summer, Ethan walked to the mailbox and heard drilling from across the neighborhood. A solar crew was working on Rachel's roof. He smiled and continued down the driveway. His own panels had been operating for months. The utility app on his phone showed steady production. His electric bill had dropped enough to confirm that the system was doing exactly what he bought it to do. Nothing about the roof looked dramatic anymore. That was the strange part. For weeks, those dark rectangles had been treated as though they threatened the identity of the entire neighborhood. Now they were simply part of the house. Ethan went inside and opened the cabinet where he kept the dispute binder. The tabs were still there. Governing documents, portal confirmation, permits, violation notices, marketing materials, insurance questionnaire. Attachment 3. Prior solar decisions. He ran a hand along the edge, then closed the cabinet. Ethan had learned that authority means little when its records cannot support its commands. Karen never lost because he shouted louder. She lost because every explanation led back to another document, another date, another unanswered question. Power can demand compliance. Records demand consistency in writing.